Alright guys, and welcome to another video. Today we're going to be evaluating what made a Retribution Paladin so good in the Burning Crusade. To first understand what made a Retribution Paladin a lot stronger and a higher tier class in TBC, we must first understand their limitations in Classic WoW. Just before I jump in guys, I have started posting a little bit of content on Instagram, so if you're interested in that, be sure to give me a quick follow. But anyway, let's jump in. So during Classic WoW, Ret Paladin had similar issues to an Enhancement Shaman because their DPS was tailored towards a more bursty form of damage rather than a sustained damage for longer boss fights. So they did decent DPS on short raid bosses, but in the longer fights they began to fall off a little bit, and this is largely because they simply don't have enough abilities in their rotation compared to a rogue, for instance, who can at least spam an active ability like Sinister Strike and Evisceration, whereas Paladins for the majority of the time only used auto attacks. Luckily in TBC this issue is fixed because Paladin were given an actual DPS ability called Crusader Strike that deals 110% weapon damage on a short 6-second cooldown, while also refreshing all judgments on the target. This was a massive boost to a Ret Paladin's DPS because the ability scaled off weapon damage, so it got better and better with better weapons, particularly very slow weapons such as Deep Thunder, which is a 3.8 second weapon speed weapon that was this for a very long time for the Ret Paladins, which is why it is generally recommended for a Ret Paladin to focus on blacksmithing as soon as possible. The ability was also on a short cooldown and very mana efficient, and the cherry on the top was the fact that it refreshed all judgments on the target. This meant Ret Paladins could easily maintain the 3 main Paladin debuffs on a boss, rather than the Holy Paladins having to refresh it all the time, because let's be honest, they mostly do forget about doing that. The debuffs were Seal of a Crusader, that increased holy damage dealt to the target, which was largely useless, but it also increased the critical strike chance of all the attacks on the boss by 3%. Judgment of Wisdom, that caused all attacks on the boss to have a chance to refund mana to the raid. And lastly, Judgment of Light, that causes all melee attacks to have a chance to heal the attacker. And Judgment of Wisdom and Judgment of Light have an extremely high proc chance. When you use Judgment and Light, for instance, your screen will just be covered with so much floating combat text that, from your heals, that you will probably have to turn it off because it will be quite distracting.
Guys, if you feel like you're falling behind on the leveling in TBC Anniversary, by far the best way to catch up is to get the leveling add-on Rested XP. It's literally made by world record holding speed levelers, and it tells you step by step exactly what to do to save you a truckload of time. For TBC, they've got optimal XP per hour routes for solo questing, but also routes that prioritize reputation gained while leveling, and also the best 5-man dungeon grinding strategy. It is the best way to support the channel, so I would really appreciate you checking it out in the description down below.
So as you can see, Crusader Strike becomes a very big ability for a Ret Paladin. It deals great damage and also provides a chunk of healing and mana regeneration for the entire raid. The next big damage boost was Avenging Wrath, that increases all damage done by 30% for 20 seconds on a 3-minute cooldown. This is a very powerful cooldown, especially as it lasted for so long and could easily be used twice in most raid fights. Ret Paladins could also use this ability to snapshot Consecration. The idea would be to use Consecration when Avenging Wrath has only a second duration left, but the Consecration will continue to deal damage as if it has still, it's still buffed by Avenging Wrath. It's also important to mention that Consecration isn't a talented ability in TBC, so it can very easily be used by every single spec, which makes a Ret Paladin a decent AoE DPS too. The only downside to Avenging Wrath was that it gave you the Forbearance debuff, which means you can't use Divine Shield or Blessing of Protection on yourself for a full minute, so you had to be careful with your timing of the ability. Another issue that Paladin had during Classic was mana. Luckily this issue is slightly improved with an ability called, what's a passive ability, called Spiritual Attunement, that would regenerate your mana equal to 10% of your total healing received. This wouldn't count on overhealing, however, and this is where we have to address the Seal of Blood. Another ability unique to the Ret spec was Repentance, that was a 6-second charm effect that can only be used on humanoid targets. This was mainly used to help with trash pulls in heroic dungeons to reduce the initial damage on a tank and allow the healers a little bit of breathing room. Personally, I've used this ability a number of times to save a group from wiping, because you can use Repentance on one target and then Hammer of Justice on another to CC 2 different enemies very quickly to allow the group to recover. Another small but useful Ret talent was improved Sanctity Aura that increased all the damage that everyone in your party dealt by 2%. A few honourable mentions would be Sanctified Judgment that refunds 80% of the mana cost of all your judgments, and Fanaticism that increased the critical strike chance at all judgments by 15%, which are great synergy with Vengeance because it allowed you to get the buff stacked up very quickly. And talent also reduced the threat you cause by anything you do, whether it's DPS or healing or buffing, by a good 30%. This meant Ret Paladins rarely had to worry about pulling aggro and could focus more on their DPS. And on top of everything mentioned so far, Ret Paladins also bring a lot of buffs to the raid. It's why most raid groups will stack many Paladins and Shamans because of all their unique and useful buffs that they provide to a raid. Ret Paladins will spec down enough into the protection tree to pick up Blessing of Kin so that they can provide they can provide every single buff available apart from Blessing of Sanctuary. Overall, Ret Paladins are a very useful addition to a raid. They are also the only DPS in the game other than the rare Arms Warrior that can make use of the two-handed weapons that drop from bosses. So if you do decide to play a Retribution Paladin, it's going to be very easy for you to get some really big fat two-handed weapons. Every single raid group will at least require one Retribution Paladin, and it's mainly to refresh the judgment debuffs on the target. That is the main reason why you do bring a Retribution Paladin. You may see two from time to time, but you're never going to see two Ret Paladins and then two Enhancement Shamans, probably, because that will probably just be a little bit overkill. So every raid needs one. In my experience of, like, when it comes to pugs and stuff like that, like actually trying to get a group as a Retribution Paladin, it can be fairly difficult at times. It's not entirely impossible, but it can be difficult for you to get to, into dungeon and heroic dungeon groups. This isn't because Retribution Paladins are bad in any way, it's just people are totally obsessed with stacking hunters, mages and warlocks when it comes to, dungeon groups and pugs and things like that. But in my opinion, if you make a Retribution Paladin, you focus on leveling up your blacksmithing to get Deep Thunder as soon as possible. You will be doing a lot of damage. You probably do more than rogues and warriors in the early phases of raiding, then probably a little bit less in the later tiers. But if you really pull your pants up, you can probably still out DPS many of the other DPS classes. But anyway guys, that's where I'm going to end the video there. My name is MetaGoblin. Until my next video, ciao.